Today I'm going to do several things. First of all, I'm going to talk about the HAKKA. And have you all received the article from the book that I'm producing? It's a chapter on HAKKA. And actually, the purpose of the chapter is to discuss how the HAKKA people developed as a community post-martial law and initiated the democracy movement in Taiwan. So what you're seeing here in the picture is in Meilong. It's in the south of Taiwan. It's a traditional village of the HAKKA. As they came to Taiwan in different groups and from various regions of China, they came with different dialects of language. And in Taiwan there are 5 separate dialects, of which only about 2 are really considered to be used, especially in Hsinchu, in Miaoli, in that area. And that is their stronghold. In the south, in Qingdong, also, they have maintained their language. But as they are just about 15% of the population, they have always been a minority and wedged in between the Hoklo, the Minnan, Fujian people, the earlier settlers who got the best land, and the indigenous people. And therefore they took opportunity to become traders and made their wealth and fortune in that way. But they're tenacious and hardworking, and that's the only way that they were able to survive. And of course the most famous HAKKA leader in Taiwan is Li Danghui. So the Hoklo are known as the Fujian population of immigrants. And they arrived and got the best land and resources. And Taiwan integrated as a district into the province of Fujian. And so Fujian people came directly within their province to a hinterland, Taiwan. And later came, and in fewer number, a fleeing population from central China settling in Guangdong, at Canton, and then deciding to make their fortunes further afar in Southeast Asia. They went to the Philippines, to Malaysia, to Vietnam. They went through Indonesia. They came into Taiwan. And they were looking for a better opportunity. And the reason they're called the guest people, Tujia, is because they are settling among other people and then treated as a guest. And in Fujian, they made these massive circular housing developments that kept their clan and lineage protected. And the Tujia people have always been very pro the mainstream of being Chinese and trying to hold on to a lineage system and the beliefs and literature to preserve it, as they have fled from the southern Song from the 12th century and decided that they would be the repository of Chinese civilization as it was broken so many times, and carried that with them. So they have always remained as a conservative and stronghold of the culture, wherever they went and settled. Yes?
how different are the dialects? Because reading the article and hearing about, I mean, I've seen it on TV before, the HAKKA channel. Do they devote different programming to different dialects, or are the dialects close enough?
There's only about
Yeah, what do they?
two of it's based on the number of speakers, like in Sinju and Miaoli, that area, and in Neilong. Those are the three areas of which the dialects are commonly used.
So do they do different programs?
So some are practically extinct or used by so few people or not even remembered. That is a good question. No one asked Li Donghui when he would give his presidential address, of which it was given first in Mandarin and then in Boklo and then in Hakka. But because he came from Taoyuan, that area, then he would speak, of course, in his own dialect. So with lifting of martial law, the Hakka Council was developed and became very prominent in Taiwan. And a lot of Hakka studies, Hakkaology, was developed. And there are world and international conferences developing the understanding of Hakka in terms of their migration to other places out of China. And Taiwan is the first stepping stone, again, out of Guangdong. You have the Hakka settling in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and developing their strain or dialect in those regions. Again, the Hakka migrating out of central China settled primarily in Guangdong province. And that's where the incubation of the Hakka dialects developed. So it would have been a major Hakka dialect of Guangdong. But he was considered Cantonese.
Yes, I thought that's
So,
interesting.
but in fact, from a Hakka family. And also they immigrated to Hawaii. So when I had a performance there at the East-West Center, Kennedy Theater, front row and center at the performance, I noticed the great-granddaughter of Dr. Sun Yat-sen sitting there with her son. And I got to know them. And there's still residents there in Hawaii. Yes.
So culturally, they're pretty close to the other Han Chinese. Yeah. I mean, so
They
the biggest
they
difference
feel
is-
that they are the, as it mentions in the last song, that the word, the writing of your ancestor is worth more than their land and property. They respect the writing so much. Anything written cannot be discarded. It has to be ritually disposed of. And throughout Taiwan there are shrines dedicated for the disposal of writing. Anything written, any note, you don't just toss it out. The writing is so respected that it has to go, whatever you have written on your scratch paper, your notes, your thoughts, go to a shrine to be burned to let the ancestors know that you're still writing. It's so important. So the Hakka believe that they are the repository of the very core of Chinese culture. And as Chinese dynasties change, and with each change there is the destruction. So the Cultural Revolution is not new to China. Each dynasty will try to destroy the old to bring forth the new. And the Hakka they are conservative people. In Europe, you might say that they are like the Mennonite who migrated from Eastern Europe to America, the Amish, and they decided that they're going to keep from the 17th century, the 18th century, a way of life, not to modernize, not to change it, but to keep it steady. And so the Hakka have tried to keep Chinese culture in a steady way over the years by conserving it, the writing, its use, its ritual, and all attributes of Chinese culture wherever they go. So if you go to Penang in Malaysia, it's an island, whole city blocks of Hakka communities, and their courtyard is at the back of the block, and all the houses open up into a common courtyard, communal, for all the children to play. They own the whole block, and all their houses are right around the block on the street. And everything behind their house in that courtyard is communal to all the residents of the block. And they keep it that way. And then these circular houses, they're all inward looking, very small windows, if at all, from the outside. One door, and it closes at dusk, opens at sunrise. And everyone has to scurry back into their communal house and stay there. And they all belong to a lineage system that is conserved. So it traditionally was very unusual for a Hakka person to marry out of their lineage, out of the community. And they would match lineages, or they would come to Taiwan and find other Hakka people. But they remained as community up to the present. So there's a long list of people, famous and notable, important people in Taiwan and in the whole region of Southeast Asia who are Hakka. They're scientists, scholars, presidents, lawyers, framing the Constitution or developing enterprise, or so many famous people come from Hakka ancestry. And it's believed because they are tenacious, hardworking, they keep to a pattern that is consistent to their culture and lineage. And like the tobacco industry, how they need to work from sunrise until late hours, and they cannot, one family, harvest all the leaves. They have to work in shifts, and all the families come and harvest the leaves and dry the leaves to make it work. So in the 1950s, with the arrival of the Kuomintang in Taiwan, it was believed, and there's some truth to the matter, that the Hakka were actually developing communist cells. It was a mistake, actually, to think so in terms of not understanding their culture, as they were having farmers' associations that were competing with the KMT authorized associations. And so they were suppressed. But on the other hand, in the Japanese period, when the communists in China were trying to develop cells in Taiwan for communism, they found the Hakka community to be receptive intellectually and in a communal way of doing things, and developed Chinese radical communal cells that would be eventually against the Japanese, and should have been welcomed, of course, when the Chinese arrived, but then treated them as communists against the KMT. But these are not commonly universal. They were very isolated, and only a few genuine communist cells among the Hakka But in most cases, they were simply farmers having a communal lifestyle that was condemned by the free enterprise system of the KMT.
When they move the mass migrations of people around, I assume boats would be the most convenient.
Yes.
To get to Lake Wally, I know would be that you couldn't go over the mountains, so you must have just taken boats around everywhere.
Yes, that's right. The railroad went as far as Suao, to the harbor. And then you take a boat down the Qingshui coast to Hualien, and there was no harbor there either. And then by launch, you would have to come from on the waves shore. And then there was a train from Hualien to Taidong. And then from Taidong, and all these train stations were at the seashore. So then you could take another boat from Taidong and go around to Kaohsiung. But the train that I take did not come into Hualien until 1980. And when I arrived at about that time in Hualien, I didn't realize that I had taken, just when the station and the railroad opened, arrived in Hualien. I thought it was here forever.
Did it look that old?
Well, it looks exactly the way it does today. It's all made in stone, and it's classic. It has a big frontage park in front of the station with a big lawn. It looks very spacious. It looked like a modern station at that time compared to the other older Japanese vintage stations, including the Taipei station. So I think from this film you have learned that there is not just the Hakka people, but there are many peoples who adhere to the conservation and the protection of Chinese culture, migrating from central China, and wherever they settle, they try to keep the genuine spirit of being Chinese alive. The sense of coming from an ancestry. So they use a plaque with all their ancestors listed on it. And if the house burns, you grab that plaque with everyone's name on it. And the feng shui simply means, as we find it here in Muzha, there's a temple on a hill, and it faces outwards. And so there's always a rest behind it. And like behind the house, there is like the back of a chair, a mound. And in front of the mound, and between that and the house, there is the dragon well. And that's the origin seed to protect the house and connect it to the dragon's vein. And the dragon's vein then proliferates through Taiwan, through the hills, through the mountains, and connects back to China. And that's why the mound is very important, to have a back to the dragon and front to the pond. And therefore you have the wind behind coming down the valley. And then that's the feng, and then the shui is the river or the pond or the water system that lies below you, in front of you. And they put a crescent pond there in front of the house to complete it, so that you have the mountain behind and the pond in front. And between the pond and the house you have a vast courtyard, and that's for taking the rice to dry it in the sunshine and to have communal activities in front of your house. So the whole system was beautifully arranged in that way. And a lot of people, they believe that this not only is to protect the house and the community, but also give it prosperity. And the most actively practice of feng shui is in Hong Kong. and the British learned about feng shui early and decided that they would practice it and invited other people to practice it, and for the purpose of having prosperity for the colony.
Do you think it worked?
Yes.
Like
And
even now they talk about feng shui, but they don't use the mountain, the dragon. They don't. I don't think they use the mound. They just take it as a bigger sense to make sure like the mountains are behind you and the sea is in front of you.
yes,
Kind of like they don't
yeah.
keep it dragon vein.
So in English it's called geomancy, and the geomancer is a person who takes the geographic dimensions by measure, and it can just be like how you arrange the furniture in your house. Where do you put your desk?
Like, oh, they still care about that here. Like your bed's not supposed to face your bathroom or something.
Or a mirror, or a window, and all of this has to be arranged. So when I first moved to Taipei and I set up my furniture, people would tear it apart and say, no, you can't put your bed there, it has to be arranged this way, and your sofa can't be there. It's facing the window, and you have to turn it around that way, and it has to face south, and this facing north, and so it's, people would not come to my house unless it was arranged that way. They wouldn't feel comfortable.
But are the houses then also constructed that way? Because I mean, then you have to, I don't know, the direction of the house has to be towards south or north or whatever.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, sure. Yeah.
There's a lot of pieces for rental.
So the beliefs, the Hanuman Si for death is also sounds like 4, and like in the hospital you don't have a 4th floor, and no one wants to be there to die on the 4th floor. Right, and so and you don't want your house at a crossroad, at a intersection T. And if you have your house situated, then you need to have a mirror or some spiritual device, so that when the spirit comes up to this crossroad and faces your house, it'll be forced back. So there's all kinds of spiritual arrangement of architecture and placement. And the feng shui is very important in terms of where you're going to live and how much you're going to pay, and what is attractive for a living situation. So if people consider that house to be of poor feng shui, the price might be just next to another house that might be very expensive, but its price might be very low because people then consider its feng shui not to be to the level that's worthy of the cost, and therefore you can get a good deal if you get a house with poor feng shui. Happen to you? Okay, that's it. I knew it. Like I got this house on the cheap, and it's and now I have all the problems. No.
There's even a building in Hong Kong that was built with a circle in the middle of the feng shui. I don't remember what exactly it was, but it's huge. Like it's like 2 buildings that are attached with like a weird big circle,
Yeah.
like gap in the middle for better feng shui.
Yeah, for the circulation of the air to pass through.
It's horrible. It's awful.
Air circulation, moisture, water.
But it's actually a little circle. It's not like a gap. It's a circle.
Yeah.
It was just.
It all is.
That's where the dragon comes through.
It's very important in terms of in Hong Kong especially.
It's so expensive there anyway. Feng shui.
Yes.
There's like, I think it was near Wan Chai Pier. There's like a building, very big, and they built that building and they said like it gets good energy,
Yes.
but sends bad energy to America. They designed like a building just, I think near Wan Chai Pier. It's like a great building. It's like a bank, something very famous. Yeah, and so a master feng shui designer has done this. Yeah.
So the Hakka have ascribed to it, have preserved it, has kept it, and utilize it. Also, as mentioned, Hakka people are writers, composers, musicians, and they treasure education and the written word. So writing is very important, and they're a repository of literature. And they've been able to keep their language in certain quarters of Taiwan alive, and which is quite remarkable, as they represent only 15% of the population. Yes.
Since they treasure the written word, what do they do now with computers and stuff? Like not handwritten stuff. Things that are typed or printed out and stuff.
So in the past 50 years, now Hakka have carried out. They're not as competitive with the mainstream population. And for example, you might have a Hakka married with a Waishan, the mainland person, or people have become more cosmopolitan in Taiwan. And most Hakka people, the descendants of these very traditional Hakka people, I mean, they go back to visit their grandparents for the Chinese New Year, but that's about it. They have almost lost all their sensibility of being Hakka. And Mr. Wei, who came to talk to us about the maps, he is Hakka from Sinju, and he has a big tract of land in Sinju, and he wants to open a Hakka Center museum and all of that going on. He treasures that so much, and it's important to him. Yes, and he's a publisher. And actually he was at TW Medical School. He gave up medicine, again, for publishing. He treasures the written word so much. And he is really a man of Hakka roots. But then he is worried that maybe his son or daughters are not going to treasure, although he's trying to get them into publishing in the same way. So each generation feels that the next generation is not going to be as genuine to the culture or their traditions. But I've been hearing this all my life. The Chinese told me that when they first came to the United States, that and during the time of the Cultural Revolution, that there wouldn't be Chinese culture anymore. This was in the 60s and 70s, and it would simply disappear into globalization. But as far as I can see, in China, the Chinese culture is very much alive, and its writing and its spoken language and respect for tradition is even in a stage of revitalization.
Okay, so the Hakka here all write traditional, but what about the Hakka still back to mainland China? They've all assimilated to traditional, which, I mean, so it's a vibe, right?
So what has happened,
Lesson there.
and what is worrisome about China and the beauty of the Hakka is that when they have migrated out, so when they live in Penang, in Malaysia, or in Singapore, or in San Francisco, they have kept actually alive their conservative traditional pattern more so than they have in China. And that is because of the communist system of unifying everything into one system, policy, language, way of life, and becoming mainstream uniformly in China. Although now there is a kind of a sense that that was a mistake, and these cultures should be revitalized in China. There's a lot of minority study centers in China now to get back these traditions, not to lose them.
I'm just curious, because I would think that in the HAKKA, one of their big things is to keep like the core of the Chinese, that they, even through the assimilation with GET simplified, that they would try to like keep the traditions within their writings, because they care about the written word so much, and they wouldn't just completely, assimilate to.
So I went to China the first time just after the Cultural Revolution, and I was astonished how the people somehow have kept hold of what they knew from the past. They guarded it. They had to let go of the material things. Things were burned and destroyed, but in their heart, the people kept this understanding of their ancestors alive, and just waited and waited. And after it was over, they were able to bring it back. No, it's very good if, well, the reason for going to the Hot Springs Museum is because it includes a community development project, how a derelict building, abandoned, actually was fenced off. And when I first went by there, I thought it was a haunted house falling down, and all these vines and the creepers from the riverbank growing up through this house. And I didn't know what it was. And then the government decided that to build a park that should be knocked down. And the community, actually was a school teacher. She brought her students there, and they did an assignment making drawings and sketches about the house, and decided, this is in the 90s, that it should be a community action that could be kept in place, restored, preserved, and made into a museum. So it is completely, I will send you an article, also in my book there's an article about this museum by one of your upperclassmates who did their master's in this program. And she is a volunteer at the museum and did her participant observation there, made her ethnography, and her study now published as a chapter in my forthcoming book. Yeah, so it shows an example of doing ethnography, and especially she was able to partake in a community development project. And so the museum is all volunteer, organized, run. Of course, betel nut is that not actually a nut. It comes from the areca nut tree, the areca palm tree. And so it's the areca nut, and it's wrapped with a betel leaf. And the betel leaf is on a vine, and then together it becomes a chew. So it's the nut split, wrapped with a betel soft leaf from the vine, and with some tobacco and lime and spice. And each formula or recipe is different. So wherever you get it, it's going to be a different taste.
But there are chains of it.
Yes, yes, and the way that it's made and the taste and its preparation and its freshness, everything is very specific. And especially it is used among the Amis as a ritual offering. to ancestors and spirits. So how all of this evolved, and it's considered that betel nut is, if you look at Southeast Asia, the oldest cultivation that predates rice. It goes back 15,000 years, and because people believed it was important to their spirit world, they have plantations of the areca nut to harvest, to offer, and also for the chew, and what it gave people in terms of something important in their culture. Very, very old monsoon Asia, specifically monsoon Asia tradition. And in Taiwan, it's the furthest north extent of the betel nut. Taiwan has a lot of things north, whereas Southeast Asia. It's part of the culture in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, and in this part of East Asia. And also it spread into some outer islands, to Micronesia. And it, again, planted, it was carried, voyaging, and planted from island to island. So it became part of a ritual plantation to grow this areca nut palm to honor the spirits and to make the chew of the nut as part of the culture that was carried throughout monsoon Asia and into the Pacific. So you can get it in Hawaii. And now we have learned about lineage systems. And as you can see from today, the HAKKA, they value their lineage system so much, and ancestry. As you know, the day of celebrating the birthday of Confucius, it is also known as Teachers' Day, because all teachers in China are considered the descendants of Confucius. So this is, and actually the descendants, the real descendants of Confucius, can all thousands of people trace their lineage back to the great master throughout China, and that was not lost in the Cultural Revolution. So this whole idea of lineage and who you're related to and going back through ancestry is quite a commitment in China. And when you consider people in Taiwan, if the 1949 migration of those people from China, what they carried with them, most importantly, was their lineage tablets. And the Hakka have it on one tablet, and other Chinese people, they might have it in lineage sticks that they keep in a bundle. And in their, and especially the Hakka, they have not temples, but they have lineage shrines. And that all the people of the same surname, thousands or hundreds of these people will go on the anniversary of their lineage to the shrine and give honor to their ancestors. And among the Taiwan and all the groups in Taiwan, the lineage all the way back to mythical totemic, like the snake or some way of honoring on their totem back to the origin of people, their lineage. So I think the theme is based on the lineage and going back with the conservation of culture.
You say Latin? Or just...
For the, let's say the Taiwan.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So all the Austronesian peoples, did not have their own writing system and kept it through memory. And they had kept it from their father's name, grandfather's name, and great-grandfather's name, that it's in a sequence of name changes that becomes your name as well. So you get a common name and then an ancestor's name attached to it. And then all those with that ancestral name, you can then trace the lineage. And among the Taiwan, you have the chiefs, nobility, and commoners, and they all have their separate lineage systems. So again, it's all about naming and the word that is given. So the importance of language as applied to lineage or the culture is required. So now you're bringing up a very interesting topic. What does constitute a culture? Because of, especially among different groups, including the HAKKA in Taiwan, there is a culture loss and extinction. So, but there are elements, like you mentioned, a legend or a story or something that will connect people to their culture, but it's not anything that they will use in their daily life. And they are primarily living in the mainstream culture, but like at Wulai, the people are a little bit out of the mainstream, even though they're close enough to Taipei, because of their identity problem. They identify with being a Thaya, but yet they can't really be a Thaya. They don't know their language, and they're not following their customs. And there's only the tourist trade. At Sun Moon Lake, it's very similar to that. And then the tourist trade, as we learned at Sun Moon Lake, actually they buy their products from Indonesia to make it look like genuine indigenous and bring it to the tourists to say this is our indigenous trade, but they're not weaving. So everything woven there is not it's not really coming from their own people. How does that work? This is and for all of the peoples in Taiwan, how genuine actually does the culture extend, and to what extent can we call it culture? I think this is a very interesting question. Because in Taiwan, the people, they're trying to follow into a mainstream system, into a common denominator for being Taiwanese, except for Orchid Island. They're definitely not following anything mainstream there, except their own way of life. And but for all the other people in Taiwan, it's trying to fit into this mosaic of being part of the nation at the expense of something very particular about your own heritage. So in terms of my own ancestry, growing up in Santa Monica, I had a grandmother on my father's side. She came from Glasgow, and she was determined that I had to be Scottish and wear my kilt and do the jig. And on the other hand, I had another grandmother. She came from Sicily and and spoke Sicilian only, pretty much, I guess. And I would have to listen to her and understand everything that she said. And then her husband he was born in Lyon, in France, and spoke primarily French. Spoke to her in French, she spoke back in Sicilian, and that's how they communicated. And I was always wondering, And then my father's father, he came from Nottingham, England, and because he was married to a Scot, she felt that she was superior and beat those English. And I had all these rivalries among my grandparents, and each one represented a different culture, completely a separate culture. And so my parents, they tried to Americanize as much as they could. They tried to be part of the mainstream, and care about all those old world values, to be, Californian in style and in language, and what was appropriate to living in Santa Monica. Although my grandfather, he, on my mother's side, did get me to France and to become a little Frenchman, of which I bailed out, went to Austria, learned to ski, and went to the gymnasium there, and got back to the United States to finish high school. But it's a kind of a turbulent cultural opposition that all these Europeans, they could not agree on being European. They were very particular in their own part, their corner of Europe, where they originated from, and very proud of that, and brought that with them to America, and wanted me to be one of them. And so they all grabbed me and be French, be Sicilian, be this Scot, and all this stuff going on, And as a kid, I'm trying to figure out, what's happening to me. So this is, and I think it's quite a common thing. And in Taiwan, I see it in the families. In Hualien, there's a vice and a mainland person, came from China. Actually, he was probably married before, but gave up his family there. Was a soldier, was forced to come to Taiwan, had nothing to do, married a local girl in Hualien, and started to raise their family. And then the children, they don't know if they're Amis or Chinese. And then they can decide later, and whatever, however it matters to them, and however they grow up. But obviously their parents are quite different people. And very strong ethnocentric Chinese father, and an accommodating Amis wife, and bringing up the children is a very common family structure. And then, of course, they have nothing to do with the Taiwanese because they're on that side of the mountains, and as mentioned, by going to Brazil, it's so far away from the main Taiwanese population on the west side, growing up in terms of the common denominator being Taiwanese. And then I find many of the families in Taiwan are also trying to adjust in terms of what actually means to be Taiwanese, or Chinese, or both, or indigenous, or how they're relating. So whereas when I first came to Taiwan, the Pingpu did not exist. Now I'm told the Pingpu are 80% of the people, because they have integrated into the Han Chinese population, and now people are being more proud of being Pingpu Han Chinese than ever before. So the identity is a very important factor in terms of choosing your ethnicity.
Looking at Japanese colonial times, and I guess more the Minnan group and idea of identity there, more in terms of because of the Japanese education system and learning of the Japanese language. I was struck by something that I read earlier, that it was a Taiwanese student in the Japanese school system here, in the common schools. And one day, another Japanese student called him, I forget the word, but it was a derogatory term for a Taiwanese person. And he got in a fight with the Japanese guy. And he wasn't so angry that the guy had used a derogatory term for a Taiwanese person. He was angry that the guy called him that because he felt he was just as Japanese as that Japanese person. So we're kind of looking into that, and even the doctors, the whole education system up into the doctors and the Taiwanese doctors.
So in the time of Japanese occupation, actually most people who were living in Taiwan who were Japanese were born in Taiwan. And it's like the old story, you're forced to return to a homeland that was not your birthplace. And what happens to people when they're forced to leave their birthplace and go to their homeland? That was never their homeland. And I think this kind of ethnography to trace actually the Japanese remained in Taiwan up to 1947 thereabouts, and then were really forced to move. And when they got into Japan, what happened to them? I don't think anyone has made a study of the Taiwanese-Japanese repatriation to Japan and what happened to the people. I mean, where would they go? What would they do? And the country was in ruins there, and without relatives or people to receive them, and they were refugees out of Taiwan. And that's another story. So you have this exodus of Japanese born in Taiwan moving to Japan, and then you have the mainland population coming out of China, of all provinces of China, coming to settle in Taiwan around the same time. In all the movement of people. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people within the span of 47 to 49, all moving out or moving in. And the disruption in terms of law and order and the people living in Taiwan at that time was very stressful. Yeah.
Did you see the remnants of the Japanese? I mean, when you arrived in Taiwan 20 years ago, did you see more of an influence of Japan than there is today?
I have not seen it change that much over time. There's about, okay, in terms of the number, let's say, of Japanese old houses, yeah, they're getting more knocked down and less than before. I mean, there was a whole section of Dongguan, all teachers' housing, were all hundreds of Japanese houses around Dongguan and around the university there. And that whole section, and they were given to professors for life. And as they got older and the professors were not living there anymore, and they got knocked down and made into dorms. So I'm seeing a lot of modernization at the expense of old Japanese architecture, wooden houses, of course. And in terms of the aesthetic in Taiwan that has a Japanese feeling, I find that to be more or less constant. I don't see any a decrease in that, or like interest in Japanese food and lifestyle or fashion. It's all coming out of Japan, even more so.
So you could say it's just constant and maybe even increasing?
what was the number one attraction in Taiwan, the National Palace Museum, was visited by millions of Japanese tourists as their way to view a source of Chinese culture. And that probably has changed. There's probably less tourists because now tourists can go to China, of course. And on the other hand, when I first came to Taiwan, there were a lot of Japanese coming because the genuine chefs of the Japanese food culture and the origin of the fish and the fish industry was so plentiful and inexpensive in Taiwan compared to Japan. You'd have whole tours of people coming for weeks on end just to eat traditional Japanese food. And they found it affordable and made in a way like from the 1930s that they couldn't even find in Japan anymore. So it was a treat for Japanese. And there's, like my travel agent in Hualien is still operating, 90% of their business is tours for Japanese. So when I say I need a ticket to the U.S., they say, what, the U.S.? We do Japan. So it's still, I think, a very prominent sector for tourism and visiting and appreciation of the Japanese culture throughout Taiwan that I've noticed over the years here. And much more apparent because when I first came, it was at the very end of the American recognition period. And so if you showed up looking like me, then people would say, must be a GI. And that has diminished completely. There isn't the sense that if you're foreign looking, you're a soldier anymore. And also the sense of American influence has decreased, but I have not noticed in the same way because I believe that the Japanese period was of such length and distinguished development in Taiwan that actually that has become part of the matrix of the culture, and the American presence actually would just be considered to be a military presence and not really part of the culture.
Just a little area in Tianmu with the airways.
Yes, yeah. As it does exist in Okinawa. It's just a military presence, but actually it's not mixed in with the culture. Yeah. If you go to any village or town in Taiwan and don't treat it superficially and talk to the people, you'll find something important. Like in Chiayi, there's a very small little town called Hozi. It's near the coast, on a flat, and there's a tree in that town, and they believe it's a sacred tree. And they built a temple around the tree, and the tree has all kinds of flags and banners. It's unique. It's like no other place in Taiwan. And what I found is that almost every town and village, if you talk to the people, there's going to be an ancestral house. There's going to be a sacred spot. There's going to be a tree, an old tree. It's going to be a monument, a marker, where someone has died or a brave person defended the village, or something that every town has that's unique. And you just need to find it. And it's nothing to do with nature or feng shui. It's what people have considered important among the community members, their ancestors, and dealing with a miracle or something that has happened. And in the south of Taiwan, there are still many temples where you have this seance with the dangi, the jitong, the spirit mediumship going on, and quite actively. And some people say, oh, it's all gone, it has disappeared. But actually, if you start looking around, you'll find it. Now the problem is that when you are looking around, you're not spending enough time to go into the in-depth grain of the culture or the place or that society to find it. You need to talk to older people, and usually when you go to a cultural center, and the people working or the volunteers at a cultural center in Taiwan, they're very proud and distinguished to have some in-depth knowledge they would love to share with you. And usually you need to have a conversation long enough that it will come up. And this is the essence of doing ethnography. Because it's very easy to go to places in Taiwan and dismiss that there's nothing unusual or different. Or it's all about mass culture, and people have forgotten their old way of life, and or they don't need it anymore. And then if you travel to the East Coast in August and see from July through August, all the Amis' big festivals by village, and they have a calendar, a tourist calendar, and you go by village, by village, by village, and they have hundreds of people doing their circle dance, and all provided for, and feasting, and you can circle dance and feast your way for a month on the East Coast at that time. And I don't see any of the traditions or the attributes of the culture. I say attributes, because they're not doing this in their daily life, ordinary life, but during their festival season. All these attributes come out.